Welcome back to Deadline DC with Brad Bannon. We are going to discuss Donald Trump's militarization of law enforcement in this half hour. Our guest is Sara Haghdoosti, who is the executive director of Win Without War. But before we go to Sara, we're going to play this clip about the newest Trump deployment of the National Guard in American cities.
We're going to Memphis. Memphis is
That's the next city.
deeply troubled. And the mayor is happy. He's a Democrat mayor. The mayor is happy. And the governor, Tennessee, the governor is happy. Deeply troubled. We're going to fix that just like we did Washington. I would have preferred going to Chicago. And so we're going to Memphis. I'm just announcing that now, and we'll straighten that out.
National Guard.
The National Guard and anybody else we need. And by the way, we'll bring in the military, too, if we need it.
I think that the National Guard here in Memphis will hurt this community, but also our country. I think it will compromise many of our rights. We'll have folks without training interacting with our citizenry, and there's a chance that that will compromise our due process rights. At the same time, the right to travel will not be unfettered because in D.C. we know they set up checkpoints, and I don't think we want to see those kinds of things in Memphis and Shelby County. We don't want to see checkpoints, armored vehicles, individuals with semi-automatic weapons patrolling our streets, military personnel in fatigues. I think it's really anti-American. I think it defies our traditions and may possibly be illegal.
Okay, that was Donald Trump announcing the deployment of National Guard to Memphis, Tennessee, which is the latest in the series of his turning law enforcement into a military enterprise. Our guest in this half hour is Sara Haghdoosti, who is the executive director of Win Without War. Sara, welcome to Deadline DC with Brad Bannon.
Thank you so much for having me, Brad. Very excited to be here.
Okay, maybe you can tell me every time I hear of Donald Trump announcing he's sending the National Guard, whether it's to Washington, D.C., or to Memphis, Tennessee, and God knows where else, it sends a shiver up my spine. Why is that?
Because it is terrifying. The way this president talks about our communities, talks about our cities, again, a few days ago, he was threatening to declare war in Chicago. And that's not how a leader should behave under any circumstances. And in that clip, the casual way he said that, oh, we would pull in the military to Memphis, that is so against all of the norms we have set up in this country that, yes, a shiver should go up your spine and more. I hope that people listening to this take action, call on their members of Congress to really push back against some of what we're seeing and to restore some of the norms that have safeguarded our country for a really long time.
Yeah, it seems to me that this, this has really bad connotations, I think, using the military as a domestic peacekeeping opposition. Uh, is there any hope, Congress can put an end to this because I think it sets a dangerous precedent when the president uses the military as his personal police force. It may be National Guards people in Memphis, Tennessee, or it may be a mass deployment of ICE agents in Chicago or Los Angeles. But it seems to me it sets a dangerous constitutional precedent. Are there people in Congress, are there any Republicans in Congress who are alarmed by this?
Well, I want to start a step beforehand. Some of the points you've said are exactly spot on. And one thing listeners should know is, the National Guard and active duty troops are not trained for local law enforcement. That's not what they do. And so, like saying you want to solve a problem, but deploying a group of people who have no training or expertise in that problem, A, is never going to work. And B, then you have a lot of people in these streets. Like, I will just share the story that I have a young child. I have an 8-year-old. And when he was hearing the stories of the National Guard coming to Chicago and hearing the president talk about declaring war on our cities, he was terrified. Like I had to sit down and explain to my kid, who is really safe in the context of all that's going on, and his question to me was, why are there men with guns coming into our city? And the harm of that kind of shift is really telling. And the way Donald Trump talks about this in the rhetoric he uses, the other thing I want to share with your listeners is just this week, in front of an alderman's office in Chicago, there was a dead rat with really like horrific anti-immigrant sentiment around it. So like Donald Trump deploying the Marines on protesters, Donald Trump deploying the National Guard, sending ICE out to really target our communities. It's allowing this level of rhetoric and this level of like fear perpetuate our communities that is incredibly destructive. Now, that's what is happening. What you asked me about, Brad, is where is the hope? What can be done? And the thing
Yes.
I will say is Chicago is actually a really great example of this.
Okay.
We've seen so many protests in Chicago. There's a great website around Hands Off Chicago. If folks are in the city and want to get involved, they should go there. But there's been banner drops, there's been protests, there's been, thankfully, a lot of state legislators as well as the governor speaking out and standing up to Trump. And for now, it has worked. And that's the thing with bullies. When you stand up to them and when you say enough is enough, they can back off. And I think that's part of the model of organizing we need to see more of. And again, people aren't sure what to do. And my thing is do something, put up a sign, like do talk to your member of Congress. And if your member of Congress isn't listening, organize around them. But it is up to us to safeguard our democracy at this point.
Do you think that campaign, I mean, 2 weeks ago or maybe 3 weeks ago, everybody was talking about the imminent national guardization of Chicago, and it never hasn't happened so far. Do you think that that campaign, scared the president off?
I mean, I would love to take credit for it, but I cannot. I would just say that
Okay.
it was lots of people in Chicago across many different organizations, as well as everyone from governors to mayors, etc., really doing this together. And yes, I think that was why Trump backed off and went somewhere else, right? And again, Trump is using this as a way, it is like not different than what a bully does, using a show of force to try and get his way. And when people stand up to bullies, they back off. And that is exactly what we saw in Chicago.
So there is some hope then.
There's absolutely hope.
Okay. Let's do this. Let me ask you before we go much farther. We're going to have to take a quick a break in a minute and a half or so. Tell us about Win Without War.
Win Without War, we have over 300,000 activists around the country. We were founded when the US invaded Iraq, and our mission is about creating a world where everyone can live with dignity and thrive without the fear of violence. And for us, that's all about how do we focus on things that actually solve problems, as opposed to what we're seeing now with things like the National Guard deployment, violence first approaches that often just make things worse.
Okay. One other thing, let me ask you before we break. Tell us about your Know Your Rights campaign.
We are putting up giant billboards outside of some of the biggest military bases in the country, asking service members one question, is this what you signed up for? And taking them to a website that connects them with a bunch of resources around the GI hotline, about veterans organizing groups like About Face. Essentially, what we're doing is service members are being put into really awful situations by this administration, and we want them to know that people have their backs. Groups like us have their backs, and if they need help and need support, there is support available.
Okay, Sarah, we have to take a quick break for our radio listeners, but we're going to continue this interview with our online viewers. Our guest is Sara Haghdoosti, who is the executive director of Win Without War. We'll be back with more of Sara after this message, and we're going to talk more about, we've talked about the domestic policy front. I would like her to talk about Win Without War's approach to foreign crises like exist in Ukraine and Gaza, because it seems to me, again, this administration wants to solve all its crises, encouraging more violence. We'll be right back after this very quick break. Welcome back to Deadline DC with Brad Bannon. My guest in this half hour is Sara Haghdoosti, who is the executive director of Win Without War. Sara, we've talked about militarization of law enforcement in the United States. It appears to me that there's a growing effort to solve international problems by resorting to violence. We have a very bitter war going on in Ukraine, which Donald Trump said he could stop in 24 hours, but now we're 8 months into his presidency, and the war is getting worse, if anything. And then in Gaza, we have a serious humanitarian situation where thousands of Gazans have been killed. Many others are homeless and starving. And so I guess my first question to you is, how is there hope that we can solve problems without catastrophes like going on in Ukraine and Gaza?
There's always hope. I have had the privilege of working with incredible people across Israel, across Palestine, and even in the Ukraine who are really pushing for ways to safeguard their communities and go back to being thriving again. And if there are people in those contexts who have that hope and are still doing that organizing, frankly, we need to as well. So there's hope is as much a strategy as it is something that we experience as an emotion. So unless we can imagine something better, then we're not going to be able to advocate for it. So yes, there is always hope.
Oh, well, I'm glad because it seems to me that it's in very short supply these days and we need more of it. Let me ask you about one thing before we bring back our radio listeners. One of the things that Donald Trump does, and one of the more disastrous things I think he's done, is he's cut off the USAID program, which involves millions of tons and food and supplies to people around the world who really need it. Could you comment on that, please?
It's a horrific policy that is, the Trump administration said it was trying to get rid of waste. And instead, what it did was it held a bunch of aid supplies and let them rot in warehouses. It is taking away money and resources from some of the world's poorest people. And beyond that, we all went through a pandemic a few years ago. We know that when you take away things like vaccines from one country and like there's breakouts of diseases don't see borders. And there's so much right now where it is so clear our safety is intertwined with people overseas. And the strategic mistake of not investing in that way doesn't just hurt people who are outside of the country, it is going to come back and hurt people here as well.
Sarah, we're going to take another quick break. We'll be right back with more of Deadline DC and Sara Haghdoosti after this break. Welcome back to Deadline DC with Brad Bannon. I want to remind we're glad to have our radio listeners back along with our online viewers. I want to remind our radio listeners that if you'd like to watch Deadline DC as well as listen to it, you can watch it at twitter.com/Brad Bannon, at facebook.com/Deadline DC with Brad Bannon /videos, and on YouTube at youtube.com/at Deadline DC. Our guest in this half hour is Sara Haghdoosti, who is the executive director of Win Without War. Sara, let me ask you this question. How should a president of the United States try to diffuse situations like Ukraine and Gaza? For instance, the Ukraine war started when Russia invaded Ukraine. And what's to stop a dictator like Vladimir Putin from engulfing a region in war? Uh, let's try Ukraine first, and I'll probably ask you the same question about Gaza.
Yeah. So what we saw in Ukraine was obviously a horrific war of aggression by Putin, and we have seen the just sheer carnage that has resulted from his horrific actions. Now, when you look at what is the best way to solve it, the way diplomacy is usually most effective is in partnership with other allies. You don't want to be going at it alone. But sadly, the Trump administration almost always tries to do things unilaterally. And because of so many of their policies, they have also alienated us from a lot of our key allies. And that makes our diplomatic strength not what it used to be. So really investing in diplomacy, really investing on how can we create a united front against a dictator like Putin is key to being able to solve the Ukrainian crisis.
Okay, well, let me ask you this question. Let's talk about Gaza.
Yeah.
Here you have the leader of Israel, Benjamin Netanyahu, who seems hell bent on eliminating the Palestinian population in Gaza. And it's my impression is, Donald Trump seems to wink at it and, occasionally criticize Netanyahu for, the bombings in Gaza, but really doesn't do anything to try to stop it. And the reality is, the Israelis are using American bombs to kill these people. And so how do you deal with how should a president deal with a situation like Gaza?
The answer here isn't actually complicated. The president should be following US law. It is really clear from the Foreign Assistance Act that the US cannot provide military support for a country that is not allowing US aid to get in to its recipients. And that is what the Israeli government has been doing for quite some time now. Now, the way you solve this is you enforce our own laws. And I just want to be clear, this isn't an international law. This is a US law, which means that you stop sending them bombs, you stop sending them offensive weapons, you ensure aid is actually getting in. There is such a crisis going on in Gaza. And that helps create the space for actually solving the problem. Because you're right, what we're seeing, the sheer amount of terror, the sheer amount of like children who are suffering in Gaza is absolutely unacceptable. And it is all happening with US made bombs. And again, we would not be here had not only President Trump, but President Biden also followed what US law had said.
Okay. Let's turn to another topic which I find alarming. Last week or the week before, U.S. Naval Air Forces destroyed and sank a Venezuelan ship that was, the Trump administration said, part of a fentanyl drug ring. And it seems to me this has got to be some kind of violation of international law. Not that anybody cares about international law. Certainly the Trump administration doesn't. But you know, is this the way? I mean, seems to me they could have stopped the ship and searched it to see if there are any drugs on it, but they just blew it up, basically.
Yeah.
Uh, could you comment on that, please?
This is one of the most outrageous things I have seen the Trump administration do, and I think it's getting not nearly enough attention. So, again, for your listeners, we don't know who was on this ship. We only have the Trump administration's word for it, right? What we do know is when the ship was struck, it wasn't coming towards the United States, it was actually moving away from it. So their initial reports that this was supposedly a direct threat to the country, total falsehood. Now, despite that, say if we take everything else they said at face value, if there were in fact drugs on this ship and there was an intent to smuggle it, there is no legal code for us directly executing people for those offenses. With like the Trump administration has made itself judge, jury, and executioner in this case, and that is horrifying. To your point, there was many other ways to solve this. Now, you paired this example of violence alongside the real opioid crisis that is happening in this country, and the fact that the Trump administration and Republicans in Congress have gutted key healthcare systems like Medicaid over the last year. And you can quickly tell this isn't actually about helping communities in need. It's not about saving a single life. Where parents, like I have met parents who have lost kids to this crisis, who are fighting for treatment, who are fighting for resources. Blowing up a ship off the coast of Venezuela with no due process that like just as like an act of essentially an act of execution isn't helping anyone and is again one of those classically performative strongman moves that President Trump pulls off to make himself look invincible when in fact all he's doing is causing harm to people overseas and us here at home at the same time.
It seems to me, Sarah, that the ethos of the Trump administration is that if it's a problem, blow it up. And that seems, true both on the domestic front and on the international front. Is it naive to suggest that we should actually go to the roots and solve drug problems and the problems of crime in the United States by taking a approach that we need government intervention to solve these problems rather than just shooting at them? And am I naive in saying that?
You're not naive at all. Like, I do recall that the Trump administration at one point threatened to bomb a tornado, I believe, or a hurricane. Like, they do have this mentality when it comes to any problem they see. And again, if you had this mentality in your everyday life, it wouldn't take you far. Of course, we need to figure out what the root causes of things are, and we should listen to people. What people are saying is they want access to healthcare. They want more of that, not less of that. People like me who are parents don't want to deal with like traumatized kids coming home from having to do gun violence drills in their schools and pretend like there's a shooter in there and hide. Those are the problems we need to have real solutions for. And violence doesn't help with any of them. So you're not just not naive, you're right on the money when it comes to the policy asks to be
Try telling that to Donald Trump. He thinks I'm probably a wacky liberal, and I probably am actually. Sarah, thanks for joining us today on Deadline DC with Brad Bannon. Our guest in this half hour was Sara Haghdoosti, who is the executive director of Win Without War. I want to thank our first guest, Randy Weingarten, president of the American Federation of Teachers, and our intrepid executive producer, Mark Grimaldi, who makes all this possible. We'll be back next week with more of Deadline DC. Uh, our guest will be uh, we'll have great guests, I'm sure. Our first guest will be Kate Ackley, who is a reporter for Bloomberg Government, and she's going to discuss President Trump and his adventures. Anyway, we'll be back next week, and I want to wish you all a good week. And hope you come back next week to Deadline DC with Brad Bannon.